Happy Thursday, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. It's been such a rainy week this week. The water comes down on the tin roof, making its own sort of music as I sit on the porch and watch it come down. Maybe I'll have a little smoke, maybe I'll just listen to something I've heard 1,000 times, but it's the rain that really brings me back time and time again to sit around and think. Maybe think of old times, maybe think of old stories. Either way, it always puts me in a mood to think. Speaking of old stories, that's actually what we're thinking about today here on Cozy Horror. I've got 5 stories about stories and books and things in general of that nature, and I just think you're going to love them. Starting us off, we've got a story about a bookshop owner and a writer who runs afoul of some strange and often questionable little terrors. So, let's learn a little more about the allure of old books.
Excuse me, I'd like to return this book. Mark sighed. Not another one. I'm very sorry, ma'am, he said, turning around on his stool to find the short redhead already looking unhappy. But all sales are final. She was tapping a copy of Wind in the Willows on the desk, and Mark grimaced as he saw the cover bow a little. When Mark had opened up this used bookstore, his retirement, he liked to joke, he had expected simple days of reading, writing, and enjoying conversations with fellow bibliophiles. What actually ended up happening was a constant stream of book collectors, people looking for deals, and homeless people looking for somewhere to use the bathroom. He'd been here for less than a month, and everything seemed to be going wrong already. Case in point, this mysterious thing with the books. He opened Wind in the Willows and knew what he would find inside. The beautiful illustrations of Toad Hall were there, but the words were gone. Some of the words were there, he noticed, as he flipped through the pages, but the majority of them were gone. This was the 10th book like this he had received in as many days, and it was becoming a big problem. He couldn't sell the books with missing words, and he shook his head as he opened the register and took out the $5 the lady had spent on it. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I have no idea how this keeps happening with these books, but I mean to get to the bottom of this. The lady nodded, mollified. See that you do, young man. I had bought it for my grandson, and he was very disappointed to find it in such a state. Mark nodded, but quietly suspected that her grandson hadn't given much of a damn about the book. Most of the child customers didn't have the attention span for anything without pictures. Wind in the Willows was probably not on his radar, and the little goblin would have probably preferred the Captain Underpants books he had on the display rack near the graphic novels. Mark waited until she was gone and moved out into the shop proper so that he could look through some of the books. He didn't know how this was happening, but he wanted it to stop. Words suddenly missing from books was bad for someone who paid the bills off the backs of bibliophiles, and as he started pulling random books off the shelves, he was alarmed to see that the tales of adventure around Toad Hall were not the only casualty. After an hour, he found 3 Dean Koontz novels, a couple of John Grisham's, and 3 Stephen King's, one of them a hardback copy of Firestarter, and about 7 more from writers he wasn't as familiar with, that were either missing words or missing whole chapters. It was infuriating, especially since he didn't understand how it was happening. He could understand if the books had been wrecked, but the books were often in perfect condition, except for the missing words. The copy of Firestarter could have gone for $25 to $45, and there wasn't a dog ear or a coffee stain to be found on it. Mark threw it across the store, pouting like a child as someone walked in and found him sitting in his little pile of ruined books. "Geez, Mark, have a little more respect for the written word." Mark cast his best unimpressed expression at Wayne before tossing a John Grisham at him, which he dodged. "I've got all the respect in the world for the written word. I just don't understand why it chooses to treat me like this." Wayne opened up the copy of Firestarter, the corner now dented in, and tutted as he looked over the pages. "That's really weird. How long's that been going on?" Mark slumped against the shelf, closing his eyes as he tried to fight off the headache that was building. "'Bout 2 weeks. Wayne stroked his chin, humming in a very convincing manner. Wayne was known in a lot of bookseller circles as a practicing wizard. That was the nicest thing that he was usually known as, and a lot of them called him a nut or a crazy. Wayne also had a pretty substantial following online, running a paranormal podcast and doing a lot with the local ghost hunting community, so he had money to burn. Wayne liked him. They had hit it off after a few encounters, and now Wayne came in almost every day. "Could be something supernatural," Wayne said, looking over the John Grisham that Mark had thrown at him. "Tell you what, let me ask around and see if anyone else has experienced anything like this." Mark shrugged. "Couldn't hurt, I guess. Shoot, there might be something to that. Maybe I've got an angry poltergeist that likes stealing words or something." Wayne shook his head, flipping the pages and looking at the words still on the page. "I doubt it. Ghosts usually don't affect things like this. I guess anything is possible, but I've never heard of a ghost stealing words from a book. I don't know. I'll ask around. Maybe it's something I can help you with." He took the copy of Firestarter with him, with Mark's blessing, and Mark started cleaning up as he moved the damaged books to a box behind the counter. His expectations were low, but he hoped that Wayne could help. He loved his bookstore, and he didn't want to close up shop due to something mysterious that was out of his control. Let it be poor bookkeeping, or lack of interest, or a fire, but not something he had completely no control over. Whether Mark succeeded or failed, he wanted it to be on his own efforts. Mark flipped the sign from open to close and locked the door as he prepared to go into his loft over the shop. It had been an all-right day. He had sold about $200 in books, thanks in part to Mrs. Shaw's summer reading list, but he'd found 4 more books with missing words. Nothing quite as financially devastating as the copy of Firestarter from earlier, but it was beginning to add up. The box of ruined books was now 20 in number, and Mark knew that there would be more. He turned off the lights on his little book kingdom and moved upstairs to start dinner. That was a problem for tomorrow, because now it was time to work on his real passion. Mark went up the stairs to his cozy little studio apartment, and after making something in the microwave, he sat down in front of his old typewriter to set to work on his novel. The novel was a sequel to his only bestseller, Ghosts of Lorelei. The book had been immensely popular about a decade ago, even getting a single season on NBC before being canceled, and a lot of reasons that the bookstore could operate in the red for as long as it had was thanks to the book sales from Ghost of Lorelei. His editor had been on him about writing a sequel for years, and after 10 years of middling crime novels and lukewarm police procedurals, Mark had decided to give it a go. Ghosts of Lorelei had been about Detective Jack Stryker as he hunted for a missing schoolgirl named Lorelei Hester. Lorelei's ghosts were the rumors, the friends, and the trail that grew colder by the day. Stryker found the girl, but it turned out that she hadn't been abducted, as her parents believed. Lorelei had overdosed on something on the roof of an abandoned building, but Stryker had to exorcise her ghosts, the masks that she had showed to others. When he finally discovered the real Lorelei, it was too late to save her, and Stryker was left with the bitter taste of failure and the corpse of a girl looking for escape. It had been a great story, and people had loved Stryker, the grizzled old detective who was sure that he had seen it all. His editor wanted a sequel, maybe a series about Jack Stryker, but Mark had never quite liked crawling into the skin of the old man. That's what he called it when he wrote, crawling into the skin and playing pretend for a while. Jack Stryker's skin, however, was leathery and not altogether comfortable. That's why it had taken him so long to get back to him, and why it had taken him so long to start the fiery effigy. He was clacking away, liking the feel of the keys beneath his fingers as he worked. Most people had upgraded to a computer or something by now, but Mark liked the way that writing on a typewriter made him feel. Something about hearing the click-clack of the keys, seeing the paper fill with words, and then Running a fresh sheet in when you were done made his writing feel like an accomplishment rather than a chore. His editor wasn't such a big fan, not really liking the manila envelopes that he got with pages in need of editing, but Mark told him that was tough shit. If he wanted the story, then he could take it Mark's way, or not at all. Mark was enjoying his trip back to Chicago in the early 60s, Jack Stryker chasing a serial killer who seemed to have an axe to grind with Stryker himself. All the victims so far had been people he had helped, clients or friends or old colleagues from his time on the force, and all of them had been burned to death. Captain Reinhold seemed to think that Stryker might be in on this, a suspect if not the killer, and Stryker found himself at odds with the police as he tried to track down the sicko. The killer was 3 victims deep now, but Stryker was hot on his tail. He had chased him to an old apartment building. He was chasing him up the stairs, the lights dim and making his target hard to identify, and as they came to the roof, Stryker felt he had him at long last. He kicked open the roof access, his big old .45 out and ready, as he checked his corners and looked for the man who had been killing his friends. "It's over," he graveled out, taking a step out of the doorway. "There's nowhere to go but back the way you came. I've got you dead to rights." Mark hissed, letting the Salisbury steak fall into the plastic holder as it burned his tongue. He blew on the meat, his eyes never leaving the page, and tried the bite again as Stryker made his way across the roof. He was checking the spaces between 2 big AC units when someone lunged and knocked his gun away. The 2 tussled, the man's hood covering his face, but as Stryker pushed the hood away, he gasped in surprise as much as in pain when the man pushed him back and made a run for it. "You!" Stryker said, watching him run for the stairs. "It can't be! You died 20 years ago!" He grabbed for his gun, but the shot missed as the hooded man made it back into the stairwell. Stryker tried to follow, but he was still 10 feet away when the door banged open, and 2 patrolmen came out with guns drawn. "Jack Stryker, you're under arrest for the murder of Frank Richard and Moira Fisk. Drop your gun and put your hands up." Mark nodded as the sheet came out, loading a fresh one in as he typed. Yeah, this was good. This was real good. As someone laid on their horn on the street below, Mark sat up violently. He was in bed, a book laid across his chest as the lamp on the nightstand glared in his eyes. The car horn had only been half the fright. He had been dreaming, having a real nightmare. He'd been down in the shop, the whole place shadowy and muzzy, and every book he pulled off the shelf was empty. All of them, every single one, was empty of any words. They were piling up, their covers full of fresh white paper, and as he dropped them, they became a sea of pages. They churned and bucked, threatening to swallow him into the inky depths, and just as his head had threatened to go under, he had woken up with a start as the car horn blared. Mark looked at the clock and found that it was about 5:30. He could get up, make some breakfast, and write for a few hours before he had to open up the shop. Last night he had written so much, getting through the interrogation scene and Stryker's escape from custody. Now he was on the run, trying to find the killer before the cops caught up with him. Mark figured he was about 75% done, in the home stretch now, and he would soon send it all to his editor for final proofing. 20 minutes later, a breakfast sandwich in his hand, Mark sat down to start writing the search for the killer. Stryker now knowing who it was, but not sure how to find him. He had a fresh piece of paper in the typewriter, glancing down at the manuscript before freezing in pure dread. He picked up the top sheet, the start of Chapter 9, and his hands shook as he looked at it. There were holes in the paragraphs, gaps where the words had been neatly removed. "How?" he whispered, his hands shaking so badly that he thought he might tear the page. "How can this be?" It was one thing when it was down in the shop. There was no way he could go over every piece of inventory to make sure it was whole. But this was something he knew had been completed. He had written this. This was his. And now it was like moths had come in the night and eaten holes in it. Mark was shocked, outraged, and as the paper ripped near the middle, he forced himself to put it back down. He would have to recreate it. He would need that sheet to get it just right. He didn't know what he would do, but Mark knew that he had to do something. The bookstore was his retirement, but this was his livelihood. He had to protect this by any means necessary. "Excuse me," said a young fella, and Mark saw him flinch as he turned to look at him. Mark must have looked a mess, but that was to be expected. He'd been writing like a madman for the last 3 days, and for those 3 days he had been sending his work off at the end of each session. Sometimes this facilitated a trip to the mailbox at 3 in the morning. Sometimes it left him tired as he opened the shop the next day. But it was worth it, if it saved his manuscript. His agent likely thought he was losing it, and maybe he was, but it kept whatever was doing this from eating his work. I was just wondering if you had any of the old Star Wars paperbacks," the kid said, stuttering a little as Mark cast his bloodshot eyes on him. "Third row, middle shelf," Mark growled, turning back to his computer screen as he furiously worked on his inventory. It wasn't hopeful. Mark had discovered about 15 books over the last 3 days, and the box was becoming fuller and fuller as he went on. He had lost about $500 of stock so far, and he knew that there was more to be found. The kid came up with a few books, one of them going into the box as Mark discovered that it had been ruined too. The guy wanted to buy it anyway, and Mark lifted an eyebrow as he handed it to him. The guy was leafing through it, looking at the holes in the paragraphs and shaking his head. "That's wild. How did you do it? I've never—" But he stopped as he glanced at Mark's face. Mark had been holding out his receipt, but it had gotten crushed in his shaking fingers as he glared at the kid. "You think I did this? You think I would do this to my books? Who the hell are you? Get out! Get out now!" Mark was unaware that he was shouting, but he couldn't stop himself. The guy might as well be accusing him of murder, and when he ran out of the store with his books, he nearly bowled over Wayne as he ran out. "Huh," Wayne said as he watched the guy take off. "You having a fire sale or something? Deals must be good. That guy practically sprinted off." Mark shook his head, pointing at the box of books. "Where have you been? I thought you were going to get me some answers. I'm losing books by the day here." Wayne put his hands up. "Easy, hoss. Apparently what you've got is pretty rare. It isn't something that a lot of people know about, and I had to look pretty far to get you answers." He took a little book out of his pocket and opened it to a marked page before laying it on the counter. Inside were a pair of mischievous-looking foxes, words hanging from their mouths, and they appeared to be eating them. The words ruin or rune were written above them, and Mark thought the name was pretty fitting. Even so, he looked at the page skeptically. Are you telling me that foxes are stealing my words?" "No, not foxes. Runes, or ruins. Translation wasn't very clear, but it's definitely something like that. They're from Germanic folklore, little creatures who eat written words. They also collect secrets and will ruin archives and libraries. They used to be favored by wizards who used them to steal their enemies' secrets, but now the ones that are left usually just make trouble for writers and bookstore owners." "Seems like something I should have heard about," Mark grumbled. Wayne winked at him. "Hard to, when the little buggers eat most of the accounts of them." "Okay," Mark said, still not believing any of it. "So, how do we get rid of them?" "We trap them. We catch them in a journal, or something that contains secrets that they can't resist. Then we trap them inside with magic. Once they're trapped, they'll eventually wither away when they run out of words to eat, or someone comes along and breaks the magic on the book and they go free. By the time either of those things happen, they'll have gotten rid of the book anyway. Most people throw it away or bury it in a hole, but some people put it in a lockbox just to be sure." Mark sighed, not sure he believed a word of this, but willing to try anything if it would stop this from happening. "Okay, what would it take to do this?" "Give me a couple of days to get the proper stuff together, and I'll conduct the ritual for you. The materials are pretty cheap. I'll come by tomorrow night after closing, and we'll get this done. Sound good?" Sure, Mark said, letting Wayne get back to whatever occupied his day. Mark didn't think anything would come of it, but whatever could be done. If nothing else, maybe it would help him figure out what exactly was going on. Either way, it would break up his usual routine, and Mark felt that if he spent another day watching his profits slip down the toilet, he'd go crazy. His phone rang then, and when he answered, it was with the usual, "Second Chance Books, Mark speaking." His agent cleared his throat and asked if he was feeling okay. "Terry," Mark said, feeling a little better as his agent's voice rolled over him. "A little stressed about the new shop, but I've been converting it into work on the book. Why, is there something wrong with the new pages?" "Yeah," Terry said, sounding less than amused. "You sent me 3 envelopes in the last 3 days, and they've been getting weirder and weirder." Mark furrowed his brow. "How so? I thought the story was progressing well." "Well, the second envelope looked like someone took whiteout to it, and it's like playing Mad Libs to figure the story out. This last one is just blank sheets with random words on them. I know I said I wanted to see results on this book, Marky, but if you're having a mental breakdown, then maybe take a day or 2 to collect yourself, all right?" Mark felt the phone shake in his hand, his voice barely holding up as he told Terry that he would get some rest and feel better. Terry said that sounded great and wished him well before hanging up on him. Mark let his cell phone fall beneath the desk, putting his head in his hands as he wept. He had been careful, so careful, he had sent it away to stop this kind of thing from happening, but it was all in vain. They had gotten his manuscripts anyway. They had eaten it up, and they would do it again. Mark found himself thinking of the ruins or runes as something real now, and as he wept, he wondered what he was going to do. If this ritual or whatever didn't work, just what the hell was he going to do? When Wayne arrived the next night, he found the store closed. He knocked, and when Mark answered the door, Wayne could tell he was drunk. "Geez, Mark, you had it a little early, aren't you?" Mark shrugged, but he didn't deny it. In reality, he had spent the night before drunk and had simply carried over into the next day. He had been beside himself as he tried to figure out what to do, and the whiskey had been an easy outlet. Mark had never been a big drinker, but he found it soothing to fall into a comfortable numbness. He had come out of it just in time to remember that Wayne was coming over around 7, and he had stumbled downstairs just in time to hear him knock. He let him in, and Wayne produced a Mead notebook from his coat. "I collected some secrets from my counterparts. Some of them are pretty juicy, too. If this doesn't draw them in, then nothing will." He passed the notebook to Mark, telling him not to open it as he sketched some symbols on the bar. Mark watched the lines bulge and swirl as his head reeled a little. There were squiggles inside the circle, ancient-looking letters and strange crabbed swirls, and as he finished, he bit his thumb and dropped some blood into the center. To Mark's amazement, the circle glowed faintly, and when Wayne took the journal and positioned it in the center of the circle, the two stepped back like hunters from a trap. "Now we wait," he explained, but it didn't take long. It was like watching graffiti move, and Mark thought he might be hallucinating. He saw these sketches of foxes moving across the counter. Some looked like pen, some looked like pencil, and there were even a few that looked like charcoal prints. They were in many different styles and skill levels, and they all made their way towards the book. They entered the pages, eating the secrets, and when the last of them hopped in, Wayne struck. He lurched forward and slammed the book shut, the symbols burning themselves into the notebook. Mark heard a small scream from the counter. Wayne waited for the burn marks to stop forming before picking up the notebook and holding it out to Mark. "All gone. You should be fine now." Mark started to reach for it, but felt like he didn't really want to touch it. He told Wayne to take it, and the man seemed happy to oblige. He said he had hoped to study the little creatures, and as he left, he was humming happily to himself. Mark was just glad to be rid of them, and he felt better than he had in days. Mark jerked awake again, almost certain that the last 4 days had been a dream. He was lying in bed, a book across his chest, and felt like maybe he had been dreaming everything after the car had woke him up. If it hadn't been for the hangover, he might have even believed it. He had celebrated a little more after Wayne had taken the ruin away. Or was it Rune? Mark couldn't remember, but he was glad they were gone. He had reached down to close the book when something caught his eye. Someone had doodled a little animal on the edge of the page, a dog or something, and Mark wondered how he'd never seen it before. When it moved off the page, still clutching a word in its mouth, Mark realized the truth. It landed on the floor, and Mark rolled off the bed and gave chase. It was like a cartoon, the little pencil-drawing fox easily escaping him as he ran after it. Mark didn't know what he would even do if he caught it, didn't know if he could catch it, but he knew he was mad. They had been caught, trapped in the journal, and the thought that one had been missed pissed him off mightily. It would get away and make more, and then they would continue to torment him. He had to nip this in the bud, get it before it could escape, and as it slipped under the door, he thundered down the stairs after it. He came into the shop, still livid, and that's when he saw them. The ruin, or rune, or whatever it was, disappeared into the shop, but the shining eyes of multitudes looked back at him in the light spilling from the stairwell. There were so many of them that Mark knew they would never get them all. It was hopeless. They would never stop, not unless he stopped them. The gasoline went up as it took hold of the bookshelf, and Mark laughed in his stupor as they burned. It was like a roach infestation, he thought, as it caught the dry books. Better to burn the whole nest and start over than spend months or years fighting them. He laughed like Nero as he watched Rome burn, and it wasn't until it was too late that he realized he was trapped. That made him laugh all the harder. It looked like the fiery effigy was him in the end. Stryker's story would never be told, and he would take it with him to the grave. Before he passed out, Mark thought that at least these little terrors wouldn't have his final story. He had ruined it all himself, and hopefully took them with him.
The theft of stolen word, especially when it would be lost forever, is a crime I quite think needs to be punished more harshly. Coming up next, we have another tale about tales. Stories told by children in the dark places of the world to elicit fear and elicit a spine-tingling time. But sometimes those stories get to be a little too real, and we see where true horror comes from. So, let's sit back and enjoy some playground tales.
And when she came out of the bathroom, her entire class was gone. The third grade class of 77 was never seen again. But they say sometimes you can still hear laughter in the woods outside. The door opened, and we all covered our eyes as Reggie grinned in at us. "I knew you guys would be telling stories again. You should have waited." Becky sighed. Randall chuffed unhappily, and I tried to smile as I told Reggie to close the door before someone saw him. We were in the old equipment storage shed by the playfield, and if an adult saw us, they would make us get out. We like to tell scary stories. The scarier the locale, the better. The old equipment shed had been unanimously decided upon because A, it was home to a lot of creepy crawlies, and B, it didn't let in a lot of light. We had to keep finding new places to tell stories because the ones we had got old pretty quick. You can tell stories in a place for only so long before it stops being scary, but also, sometimes it was because the teachers chased us out. The third reason was stepping in right now and grinning like a shot fox at us. Reggie was the weird kid of PS24, and he had earned that title honestly. It wasn't just because he was overweight to the point of being a blob, And it wasn't just because his hair was full of thick, gross-looking dandruff. It wasn't just because his dad was the janitor and seemed to love the job, or because he ate sauerkraut and onion sandwiches for lunch. The reason was that Reggie just emanated an aura of unsettledness. I got the feeling about him that I got about certain adults or dogs, the ones your parents tell you to stay away from. Reggie had a feeling of danger, of not rightness about him, and it made me uneasy. It didn't help that he had adopted us as his best friends this year. Becky, Randall, and I had been friends since kindergarten, but we had managed to avoid getting too close to Reggie. That had lasted until 4th grade, when we were in Miss Novak's class together. Reggie had decided that we were his best friends. He didn't have any regular friends, and he adopted us as his. This led to a year of smelling his sandwiches at lunch, having him follow us on our playground games, and listening to his wheezy, resting breath as he sat in our pod in class. We had hoped that we would be rid of him at the end of the year, but when our parents had signed us up for summer school care, a kind of after-school care during the summer, we had groaned as Reggie came in and saw us. He explained that the school had agreed to let him attend for free if his dad worked through the summer, and we all prayed that he would be in a different 5th grade class than us when next year rolled around. "Well, since you've already started telling stories, I got a good one," Reggie said. "It's the tale of the skinned raccoon." Reggie started to lay out his story about a skinned raccoon that had been seen one night while his dad worked late, and we all tried to pretend that it wasn't the most gruesome thing we had ever heard. The way he described the raccoon made me think that he had not only really seen it, but that he had probably skinned it himself. He said it had left little red footprints on the floor as it walked away, and his father had been angry when he found them. "We followed them all the way to the woods, but we never did find the raccoon." We all made an appreciatively scared noise, but I think we were all just hoping that he would let us move on. When Mrs. Simon pushed the door open a moment later, telling us this was off limits and we needed to leave, it was almost a relief. We left the shed, trying to kind of lose Reggie as we did, but we knew he'd find us again. It was impossible to hide from Reggie. He knew everywhere and everything about the school, all the hidden nooks and crannies. His dad had keys to any door in the school, and Reggie often borrowed some of them to get into places he shouldn't. His dad always covered for him, for some reason, so he never got in any trouble. It's weird, it was like his dad was scared of him sometimes, but he was a grown-up, and there was no reason that he should have been afraid of him. As we left the shed, running into the sunshine of the triple-digit day, Reggie said something that caught my interest. "That's a shame. I was going to tell you guys about how I saw the missing kids a few nights ago." The missing kids. That was a big topic of discussion these days. Last year, 4 kids had gone missing from PS24. A 1st grader named Mary Edwards, a 3rd grader named George Tate, a kindergartner named Savannah Marcus, and a 5th grader named Robbie Fust. They had come to school and then just never left. The cameras at the school left a lot to be desired. That's what my dad said, anyway. And they hadn't seen the kids leave school by any of the other exits either. My dad works for the police department, and he told me I needed to be extra safe until they found whoever was doing this. They suspected a teacher, but the question was, how would they get the kids out? If they were hiding the kids in the school somehow, then they would have been found by now, wouldn't they? They had searched the school a bunch. The disappearance had hung about the school like ghosts, and it sounded like the teachers were afraid that they might lose their job if it kept happening. I thought about what he had said until after lunch and decided I would just have to ask him. We were playing outside, the day a little cooler now that the sun was heading towards down, and Reggie was leaning against the fence and watching people as he often did. Reggie liked to just sit there and look at people, watching them as they went past, but he didn't make up stories about them or anything. He just watched them like the animals in the zoo watch fat kids. It was really weird. "So Reggie," I said, and Becky and Randall looked surprised since we never really talked to him and just accepted when he talked at us. "What do you mean that you were going to tell us about the missing kids?" Reggie turned his gaze away from a first grader who was chasing a ball with some effort, and his grin was downright predatory. "Oh yeah, I saw them the other night when Dad was working late." "Like you saw them, I said. "Like you know where they are." "Well, yeah," Reggie said. "They're under the school." I looked at Becky and Randall, and the two of them now looked as interested as I was. "Why haven't you told anyone?" Reggie shrugged. "No one asked." I could have smacked myself in the forehead. "Well, can you take us there?" Reggie was already grinning like a creepypasta monster, but I saw a glimmer pass over his eye, and I should have known to take it back. He wanted to show us. He wanted us to come with him, and I suddenly didn't want to go. But it didn't really matter if I wanted to or not. If there was a chance I could help my dad find those kids, I wanted to. Dad was worried about losing his job, too, if they didn't find somebody, and I didn't want that to happen. "Yeah, I'll show you. Come on." Reggie looked over at Mrs. Simon and Mrs. Gay to make sure they weren't paying attention, and the four of us headed towards the school. Reggie led us into a side door, through the third-grade hallway, and to the middle of the school to an area called the Square. The Square had been a part of PS-24 since it was built in the 70s. It's an area of grass with a couple of small trees growing there. How the roots don't mess up the school, I don't know, but it's a place that a lot of kids usually go to between classes. There's a utility building in the middle of it, and that was where Reggie took us. He pulled out a long key from his short pants and unlocked the door, ushering us into the little building before closing us into total darkness. Then he pulled the chain on a light hanging from the ceiling, and we were left looking around a small square room of tools and other implements. "There's no one here," Becky said, looking around before looking back at Reggie with a scared look. "Well, yeah," Reggie said, grabbing an edge of what turned out to be a carpet. "Otherwise, they would have found them by now." He pulled the carpet back and revealed a hatch in the floor. It was flush against the ground, with no wheel or handle to poke out, and if you didn't know it was there, you would never even see the rug. Reggie squeezed a pair of handles and pulled the hatch up to reveal a ladder that led down into the earth. Reggie started climbing down like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and when he saw that we weren't following, he asked us if we were coming. "They're down here. If you want to see them, then you'll have to come down," he said, making his way down again as if the matter was settled. I looked at Randall, but he just shook his head and went for the door. "No way, man. This is way too weird for me." He put a hand on the knob, but when he turned it, the door was locked. I went to look for the flip lock that would let us out, but the other side of the knob had a keyhole. I'd never seen anything like this, and I realized that Reggie had the only key to the door. We were locked in with him, for better or worse, and he would need to let us out again. I looked at the hole and figured it beat being stuck in here. At least, we might find another way out if we went down. We descended the ladder slowly, the darkness thick around us. I tried turning on the light on my watch so we could see a little, but it didn't provide much light. We spread out, trying to find a switch, and when the light suddenly came on, I jumped. We were in a big room, like a storage unit, and it stretched the length of the grassy area above us. The ceiling was metal, the walls were metal, the floor was concrete, and the place was full of boxes. They were stacked up to the ceiling in some places, and I wondered what this place had been before it was just here to store things. We grouped up, moving around as we checked the room, and I saw something speckled on the floor. It looked like someone had spilled juice, or maybe paint, and as we came around a big stack of boxes, I saw another door. This one wasn't locked, and as it came open, we saw that it led down a long hallway that went further into the underground. "What is this place, anyway?" Becky asked, sounding a little scared as we followed the tunnel. "I'm not sure," Randall said, "but my mom told me that she used to go here, back in the early 80s, and people used to talk about there being bomb shelters or something under the school. She never saw them, but she said that was something the other kids told stories about. "You think that's what these are?" I asked, seeing a door coming up on our left. Randall shrugged. "Maybe, I guess. It would make sense for it to be in the very middle of the school." We tried the door, but it was locked tight. The next 3 were also locked, but the 5th door opened pretty easily and held what we were looking for. Well, not exactly what we were looking for, but we found the missing kids. The room had been some kind of workroom that had been turned into just another storage room. The boxes that the kids were lying on were drenched in blood. They were dead, thankfully. If they hadn't been, they would have been screaming. They were naked, their clothes lying in rags, and someone had been very busy. Their arms and legs had been removed, the bones broken cruelly. Their stomachs had been opened, their entrails hanging around them like snakes, and a few of them were missing eyes. The little girl, Mary, I thought, had her jaw pulled off and her tongue was missing. Becky started throwing up. Randall sounded like he wanted to scream, and when someone started laughing, I knew we'd stumbled into a trap. It was Reggie, his bulk blocking the door. He had a knife, the long kind you found in a kitchen, and he was grinning like a creep again. He just kept standing there, not trying to come after us, and it was clear that he realized, like we had, that we weren't going anywhere. "Looks like you found the lost kids. Guess it's time to add 3 more to my little collection." "Come on, Reggie," I said, trying to talk our way out of this. This isn't funny. You got us pretty good with these Halloween decorations, but enough's enough. You win. Just let us out so we can... When he slashed me across my chest, slicing a long red line that split my t-shirt and my skin beneath, I hissed in pain and stumbled back. "There's no getting out now. You're staying here forever. I meant to get you all before school ended, but there was never a good opportunity. Now, we can be friends forever. All 8 of us." I was scared, but Randall had clearly gone past scared. He screamed like a cat that's been stomped on and ran at Reggie, shoving him as the big boy stabbed him in the shoulder. Even though he got him, Reggie was still off balance. He fell into some of the boxes, and we scattered. Randall had gone back the way we came, Becky running after him, but I knew there was no way out that way. I went left, running into the unknown, and when someone roared like an angry beast behind me, I charged heedlessly. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know how far I ran, but when I slammed into a ladder, it was hard enough to make my eyes blur. I shook myself as I started to climb. I couldn't let him catch me. If he caught me, I'd be dead. I climbed and climbed and climbed, and when I got to the top, I pushed at the hatch and almost screamed when it wouldn't move. I pushed and pushed, getting a little bit of give, but it always came back down again. I couldn't make it budge, not even a little bit, and as I shoved at it, I started hearing something down the tunnel behind me. It wasn't loud, not like someone running, but it was feet coming up the concrete. I screamed and shoved at the hatch, feeling it give but not open. I squinted as something fell on my face, dirt or something, and I had to brace my back against the wall so I could use both hands. I got brief flashes of light as I shoved, just the slight glimmer from the edges, and when I heard the laughter from the bottom of the ladder, I kept shoving, praying to God to help me. "Found you," Reggie sing-songed, putting his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. "You might as well just come down. That hatch doesn't open. I don't know where it comes out at, but it's not gonna help you." He started climbing, and I felt like crying as I shoved at the hatch. My arms were hurting almost as badly as my chest, and I was afraid that he would get me before the latch could open. He would cut my legs, and I'd fall down the ladder. Then he'd do whatever he wanted, probably drag me back to his little room and finish me off. I shoved and shoved, yelling for help as he got closer and closer. He was climbing slow, on purpose, really stretching it out, and his words were muffled by the knife that he held in his teeth. Scream all you like. No one is coming to help. But we both squinted when the hatch came slowly open, and I saw the faces of about 7 or 8 kids I recognized from the program. They helped me out, yelling for a teacher as Reggie retreated down the ladder. They had seen him, though. They knew he had been down there, and as the teachers came running, I was lying on the grass and breathing heavily. I was in a corner of the field, the back corner by the utility shed, and the kids had been playing kickball when they heard a loud shrieking noise that had come from that direction. It was the hinges on the door, long ago grown over with grass and covered with dirt. They came over and saw it opening and closing, and when they heard me yelling, they came to help pull me out. The group of them had managed to fling it open, and Mrs. Simons was running to see what they were talking about. I breathed a sigh of relief. I told them what had happened, told them how Becky and Randall were still down there, and Mrs. Simons sent someone to call the police, but wouldn't go down there herself. If what you're saying is true, then it would be dangerous for us to go down there until the police get here. They came pretty quick, my dad with them, and I told them the story again and begged them to save my friends before he hurt them. They went down the ladder, guns drawn and flashlights out, and my dad and another officer told me to take them to the shed that Reggie had brought us down from. I took him there, but the door was standing open, and I knew that Reggie had fled. Dad went down the ladder, and to my relief came up with Becky and Randall. They were scared, but unharmed. They told us how Reggie had come running for the front door and climbed up while they hid behind some boxes. They said he hadn't even noticed them as they ran, and he seemed pretty scared. They took the bodies out in bags, and the whole place was covered in tape. They got Reggie's dad, too, and he told them how he had known there was something off about his son, but he hadn't known what it was. I know it's not right to be afraid of your kid, but I was really afraid that he would kill me one night. The police decided he hadn't had anything to do with it, though I heard the school fired him for knowingly letting Reggie take his keys and get into restricted areas. As for Reggie, no one knows what happened to him. Wherever he ran to, he was never seen again. Now the ghost stories around school are about Reggie and how he's just waiting for his next chance to kill more kids. If they'd been down there in those tunnels that day, if they'd had stood face to face with the psycho while he contemplated killing us, they might not be so quick to tell stories about him.
No one ever realizes they're part of a story until it's all over. Sad, really. I think I'd like to realize that I'm part of a story. Coming up next, we have a family legacy left for a man searching his family home for answers. So, let's hear a little more about letters in the attic.
I inherited my parents' old house about a year ago. As a single guy in his mid-20s, this was quite a windfall. My mom had died of a stroke in the upstairs bedroom, a room I kept mostly locked up. I never knew my dad. He split before I was born, but the house was something he left to my mom before disappearing. It was a house that had been in his family for generations, and it was the only piece of my father that I had left. My grandparents have been dead since before I was born, and my father was an only child. That being said, there was no real family to inherit the family estate, except for my mother and I. As an only child myself, my father had never really got around to siring any other brothers or sisters for me. I had never really wanted for much. Dad's estate took care of the bills, my education, and the upkeep of the house. I always kind of wished he had stuck around if he'd gone that far, but I suppose it had finally caught up with him. Mom always said that Dad was an eccentric, a scientist who studied weird stuff for a research facility, and whatever he did must have paid well, because I'd made it all the way through college without even touching the trust fund that Mom had set aside for me. And now I had an 8-bedroom, 3-bath mansion in need of some serious renovations. I decided to start with the attic. The attic had always interested me, even when I was a kid. I used to play up there, looking into the old chests and peeking into armoires and scaring myself with make-believe ghost stories. It was nice up there, though. The stained glass window that overlooked the street always made little rainbows on the wooden floor just for me. I wanted to clean it up a little bit and build an office up there so I could do my accounting and bookkeeping in peace. The problem was that it was structurally unstable. The wall was a crumbling old brick, the mortar trying to let go for the last 40 years or so. I was afraid it wouldn't take much more than one good windstorm to knock it in, and I really wanted to fix it up and work my way down. As I started cleaning it out, I was delighted to find that the attic might actually pay for its own renovations. It was packed with old furniture and antiques that I found some interest for with the local antique dealers. I took a few pictures on my phone and sent some to the local antique shops. They seemed all the more enthralled to get their hands on them. I separated off the stuff I wanted to sell, keeping a small pile of things that I did not. After a couple of days of men with dollies coming in and out of the house, I found myself about $25,000 richer. The old antiques had more than paid for the facelift, and I started looking at supplies to replace the old brick with. I didn't know if I'd have to replace the beams behind it, but I suspected that I might. Mom told me that Dad had said the attic was one of the few original parts of the house, which had apparently been built in the late 1700s. It was one of the first large homes to be constructed in the area, and his ancestors had received it from some fellow after working the land for him. They had been less indentured servants and more live-in caretakers. The man had hundreds of acres, a large farm, and several dairy cows that needed to be taken care of. My dad's forebears and their children had been more than up to the task, having recently immigrated from Ireland. When he had left it all to them in the will, they had suddenly become very rich and very powerful in what was an up-and-coming part of the world. That would make the attic nearly 300 years old, and the fact that it was still standing was a marvel in of itself. I had talked with a friend of mine who was a member of code enforcement for the city, and he had said to be careful when I started taking down the bricks. He said he was pretty certain they weren't load-bearing, but if the attic was as old as I had said, then it would be an accident waiting to happen. I'd been up in the attic during all kinds of weather, and I'd never seen it so much as sway in the wind. Whoever had built it had done some amazing work, and had actually built it to last. As I set to work taking down the first of the bricks, I did so with an ear out in case I needed to run. I had barely set my hammer to work when I saw something sticking out between a loose brick. It appeared to be an envelope, an old and yellow thing that likely would have crumbled to nothing had it not been sealed up in the wall. I reached out for it, wiping masonry dust off of it as I looked at the front. It was signed, "To my child," from Marcus Krim, and it was dated 1934. This gave me pause. As far as I knew, there was only one Marcus Krim that had ever lived in this house, and he had been my father. To my knowledge, though, he hadn't even been born in 1934. I set the letter aside, not really sure what to make of it, and kept working. The wall appeared to be held up not by wooden beams, but metal beams. That struck me as weird, because the means to do so in the 1700s would have been very difficult to achieve. They were crude metal beams, to be sure, but they were very thick and very sturdy, and had likely taken someone a very long time to put into place, without a crane or some sort of tools. However the architect had managed it, this was tremendous. I would save a lot of my recent windfall by not having to replace the wooden beams that I had assumed would be there, and decided that the flaky wall was just a product of its time. I was halfway through the north face of the wall when I found another letter. The front of this one read, "To my child," from Marcus Krim, 1984. The date on the letter seemed reasonable. My father would have been about 12 years old in 1984, but I doubted that he was writing letters and putting them in the masonry. I set it aside, wanting to get back to work, but it was hard not to open it to see what it contained. This one looked a lot newer than the other one, and I supposed it had spent a lot less time in the wall. Why my father was leaving letters for me inside the attic wall, I didn't know, but I supposed that when I was done for the day, I might sit down and see what he had written me. By midday, I had found 5 other letters, and my curiosity was piqued. I had found one from 1984, one from 1934, one from 1956, and another one from 1890. There was also a 5th from 1954. They had been stuffed in the wall behind loose bricks, popping out as I smashed up the wall with my sledgehammer, and as I broke for lunch, I decided that it might be time to have a look at them. I didn't know if this was some elaborate joke someone was playing on me or not, but the idea of getting letters from my father, a man that I had never known, was intriguing. Maybe the dates were code or something, and I wondered if there was some other treasure to be found in the house, besides the antiques in the attic, that was. I decided to open the letter from 1984 first, it being the closest to today's date. Inside was a handwritten letter in what I recognized as my father's meticulous script. I had seen some of his journals in the library, writings on physics and scientific theory, and I was familiar with the way that he wrote. He marked the envelope with a stamp, though I had no idea why, and it had been sealed with wax that was light as I broke it. Hello. As I have not learned your gender yet, your mother insists that it be kept a secret, I'll just call you Child. I suspect you have questions, and I wish I could answer all of them, but I fear this letter will be a poor explanation. Your mother may have told you that I was involved with an organization studying scientific principles. One of the principles they were interested in was time travel. It wasn't something I believed in, but I was willing to take their money and study their theories. I thought the concept was so much hogwash, but as we began to make breakthroughs, I had to admit that there was merit to it. I began to get excited, thinking we might actually break the secret of passing backwards and forwards in time. On the day of testing, we all drew straws to see who would be the one to test the device. I drew the short straw, so I was placed inside the chamber. I pray they did not send anyone after me, because it appears that something has gone terribly wrong. I closed my eyes in 1998 and opened them again in 1984. We'd done it. We could go back in time. But there was a problem. I had no way to return, and it appeared that my means of time travel was unstable. I arrived in December 1984, but 3 days later I was in September 1984. I was jumping backwards in time, little hops at first, but I suspected they might become progressively stronger as time went on. I don't know how to contact you, or if you'll ever find this letter, but I know the house has existed for at least 200 years. If I leave a letter in the attic, somewhere it's not likely to be stumbled across until someone is looking for something else, maybe you'll find it, and you'll know that I didn't abandon you and your mother. You'll know what actually happened. I'm going to break into your grandparents' house tonight and hide this in the attic. I remember that tonight was when they left me at my sitter's house and went out to see a late movie, so there should be more than enough time to get in and leave the letter in the wall of the attic. I hope it finds you well, and I hope that you are well. Sincerely, Marcus Krem. I was speechless for a moment, not sure what to make of it. Was this real? I'd known my father was a little eccentric. Mother said he towed the line between genius and crazy, but this was out there. Had my father been playing some elaborate joke before he left? Had he been trying to trick a small child into thinking that his father was just a time traveler and not a deadbeat? I didn't know, but it only made me more curious to see the other notes. I shifted through them until I came to the one from 1956. It was the next one in chronological order and seemed to be the best place to pick up the story. I opened it with a finger, wincing as the old paper sliced me a little, but I sucked at the paper cut as I spilled the paper onto the old desk. A few drops pattered onto the blotter, but the letter was spared, and as I sucked at it, I read what I had written there. Child, I've spent the last week shifting backwards every few days. Sometimes I would stay in a spot for days, sometimes it was seconds, but it seems I'm destined to live my life backwards. I always seem to stay in the same town, the town I grew up in, and It's odd to watch the town slowly grow younger, opening your eyes to see the town shrinking, a building at a time. I spent 2 weeks leaping backwards at various speeds, but when I finally came to rest in March of 1956, I felt jet-lagged. The town was half the size it had been. The cars as different from the turn of the century as they would be in the early 1900s. People looked at me strangely, my clothes likely appearing odd, but my money still worked. The teller would get a shock when he realized that they had a bill that wouldn't be circulated for 40 years, but I needed to eat. I didn't have a lot of money when I traveled, $100 and a couple of 20s in my wallet, but as the cost of things goes down, the money stretches a little further. Your grandfather, my dad, is so young. I saw him playing outside the house, a boy of maybe 10 or 11, and it was hard not to hail him and talk to him. I plan to break into the house again when the family is gone and leave this letter in the wall of the attic. I better do it soon. Who knows how long I'll have before I travel again. I hope you're doing well, and hope your mother is also well. It's strange to talk to someone you've never met, but I hope these letters shed some light on where I've been and why I haven't been in your life. I was beginning to think the notes had been left by my mother, but how would she so expertly duplicated his handwriting? All of Dad's journals were written like this, the same meticulous script, and it even sounded like the voice I'd always given him when I read his journals. He would sound like a scientist, like my science teacher had when I was in school, and as I reached for the next letter, I came across the one from 1934. The envelope was ancient-looking, the outside yellowed and sealed in the same wax the others had been. The wax on this one was brittle with age, and it crumbled under my fingers as I broke it. I started to slide my finger under the adhesive, but looked in the desk till I found the letter opener I remembered seeing there. A quick slash, and I had the note in my hand. Child, I went to sleep 2 days after delivering the letter to the wall, and woke up 60 years in the past. This was the longest jump I've ever made, and I had to write this one quickly before it sent me sailing off again. The town looks more like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show than the bustling city I remember. Main Street is here, as is the post office and the police station, but everything else has changed. There are stores, but they seem less grand than the ones here before them. The house is still here, and I can see my grandfather as he sits on the lawn with my grandmother, both of them in their senior year of high school. Grandpa will get his draft letter in 6 years, taking him out of the steel mill before the explosion that kills so many, saving him and probably saving me from not being born. Grandma will give birth to my father a year after that, and Grandpa will come back from France with a few scars and many memories to regale his son and later his grandson with. I never knew my great-grandfather, not well enough, and it's odd to see them as they go about their lives. I've seen men going into the house the last few days, men doing work on the study on the second floor, and have managed to get a pair of white overalls and a cap from a clothesline. Tomorrow I will mingle with them and drop this letter in the wall, if I'm not years farther from where I started by then. I sorted the remaining letters, my work forgotten, and decided on the one from 1890. It was the next one in sequence, though that sequence was far out of whack now. My hands shook a little as I opened it with the letter opener. Fake or not, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to set this up, and the story was so good that I had to know how it ended. My work was forgotten, the mystery too much for me to put down now. As the wax seal fell to brittle shards on the desk, I took out the thick and uncomfortable paper that had been laid into the equally heavy envelope. Child, it appears I sealed my letter in the wall at just the right time. The house was fumigated the next day, and it would have been nearly impossible to get back in. I also traveled again 4 days later, and this was one of my most hectic trips. I would be stuck in a time for a day or two, but just as I would pen a letter, I would be dragged backwards into something else. I've started trading my money for gold and silver as I go farther and farther back. I'll soon come to a time when paper money means nothing, and then I might as well burn the notes to keep me warm. Gold, however, maintains its value, as does silver, and so I now have a few actual dollars left, and some mintings of gold and silver on my person. I've got them hidden in a backpack that also seems to travel with me. I wish I had experimented with this a little more, but even though these letters are decades apart, I've really only lost a month at the most. It feels like just last week when I opened my eyes in 1984, but I'm becoming worried that I might be slowing down a little. This last trip has brought me to 1890, and the town is little more than a general store, a saloon, and a collection of frontier businesses. I had to steal more clothes. My modern attire marked me as an outsider. I'm thankful that I traded for gold. My money would be useless out here, but gold is always useful. The house is still here too, but I've skipped 4 or 5 generations. The house is now a plantation, the land worked by field hands, and the house is set considerably out of town. I went there to seek field work, but they thought I was a cousin who'd come to call. They put me up, showing a lot of the old world hospitality I've always heard so much about, which will make it easier to hide this letter. I hope I come to rest soon. I hope this stops. I go to sleep, I blink, and my heart is filled with dread on when I will open my eyes again. I hope you're well, and I hope you're living a better life than I. I exhaled, looking at the last letter. This one was marked 1854, and it appeared it was the last one I had. As I picked it up, a thought occurred to me. How many more letters could there be in these walls? How many more could there be that covered dates in between the ones I had found? I was no longer skeptical. Quite the contrary, I was hungry for more, and as I split this one open, I held the brittle paper gently, afraid it would fall apart before I got the chance to read it. Child, the traveling is definitely slowing down. I spent 3 months with my forebears in 1890. After that, I spent a month in 1880, 2 months in 1870, and now I've landed in 1854. I've returned to the house again, claiming to be a cousin, and it's odd to see the same people I saw in the 1890s, but years younger. The matron who invited me in is now a mere slip of a girl. Her brother, maimed in the war, is now a healthy young man, passionate about states' rights and the laws that govern man. I'm embarrassed to report that the field hands I saw earlier have been replaced with slaves, but I suppose that was to be expected. They accepted me into their home again, and I suppose I will stay here until I travel again. I hope you are well, and I hope you do not hate me too much. That was it, but I felt like I knew where I could find other letters. It was late into the night when all the bricks were torn down, and I looked amongst the rubble for any signs of paperwork. I'd started out being very careful, an archaeologist looking for old bones, but after hours of fruitless plinking, I began to level the walls with abandon. I no longer listened for the groans of old boards or the crash of the ceiling. The iron bracings had held the attic up this long. They would do it a while longer. I searched and searched, looking for something, and when I saw metal glinting beside a bracing, I went to it and found a lockbox made of rusted old iron. It was a relic, the metal so old it had begun to disintegrate in places, and I was careful as I knocked the lock off and pulled at the lid. I didn't think it would open for a terrible moment, but as it squealed apart like a funhouse door, I saw a tube inside with a wax cap at the end. Someone had written 1775 on the outside, and I opened it carefully as I dumped the fragile paper out beside the rest. If the paper from the last one had been fragile, then this one was almost elven. It felt like skin, and it was so thin that I could almost see through it. The ink was thick and flaky, clearly done with a real pen, and as I read it, I realized I had come to the end, or maybe the beginning. Child, 1770. I've come back as far as I'm able. The last year was a series of travels, back and back and back. Sometimes I might get as much as a week in one time, but usually it was hours. It seemed, however, that I have come to rest at last. I've been living on the land that will one day be our family home, and I realize that there is no old benefactor waiting for us to come and settle here. The land is still mostly trees, but I've come to the spot where our house will soon stand. I went into town, the closest town I could find, and purchased it for what I would consider a pittance. The man at the trade office seemed surprised by the amount of gold I had on my person, but it would seem like nothing to someone from our time. I had co-workers who had begun to lay gold back for the coming millennium, sure that the banks would crash and the money would be useless, but out here, money is nothing more but paper and ink. I was able to buy 100 acres and secure enough supplies to build the house and start the farm. I've shown them how to make metal beams, something that I took for granted in my world of metal and glass. The house will be strong, no wooden beams to break and bend, and I secured enough strong backs to help me build it. 1773. The construction is done, for the most part. The attic was difficult to build with their current level of technology, but I think they did okay. The house looks just like it always has, and as we set up the barn and the fields, I have begun to loan money to those who are in need. The interest alone has made me wealthy, and have become quite well known in the area. The workers I've hired have settled land nearby, and I believe they are establishing the town that will one day encompass this house. 1775. I've lived here for 5 years and have not traveled once in all that time. I think perhaps whatever moved me has dissipated, and I'm now here for good. The town is doing well. They've established a general store and are now a steady trade route on the road west. I have men who work the land for me, who tend the cows and the sheep as I sit in my mansion and rake in the profits. Life is good, but I am aware of what is to come. I'm no fool, and I know where this path will take me. 1780. I saw them today. They came to the house, asking for work. My 8 times great-grandfather came onto the porch with his hat in his hand and begged me for a job. He said his wife would be happy to be my cook, and his children would help with the land. That sounded fine to me. Most young men who helped me build the house and work the land have gone to fight in the Revolutionary War, and have been struggling to keep up with the chores around here. Thomas has 10 children, a good Irish Catholic family, and the youngest is old enough to help with the day-to-day affairs of the farm. I agreed to hire them on immediately. I am the generous benefactor my family legend speaks of, and I will be dead in the next 15 years. I may have stopped traveling, but I can feel my body aging faster than it should. 15 years is a long time, but I'm sure it will seem like no time at all to me. 1785. The war has been over for 2 years, but a lot of the men who went to fight haven't come back. I'm going to finish this letter and put it in the attic while I still have the strength to do so. I'm barely 50, but I look like a man in his 70s. I can barely make it up the stairs on a good day. I don't know how I will live another 10 years, but I know that if I don't get this in the wall, it may be my last chance. It's sobering to realize that I am the one who's responsible for my family's wealth, the one who made it possible for those who come before me to live in relative ease, but I suppose that that's the way of it. If you ever find this, I hope you won't hate me too much. It was not my intention to leave you, but I see now that I would have likely been a terrible father. My work held too much of my attention to ever take you to a baseball game or sit with you, and spend an afternoon on the couch. I would have neglected you, and for that I am sorry. This, it appears, is my gift to you. Use it well. You never know when you might be called upon to make your own history. I love you, and I hope you are well. Yours always, Marcus Krim. I sat at the desk and just looked at the collection of letters. It was my dad. He had built the house. He had set our family up. Then he had died without telling them who he was. It was unthinkable, and I realized I had no way to prove any of it. There would be no records going back that far. The original owner of the house had lived before the town had, and the receipt of bill of sale would not have survived. I suddenly wished that Mom was here. She would have wanted to see the letters and would have likely believed them without question. I wished a lot of people were still there, but there was no one to substantiate these claims. I wondered if this was how Dad had felt as he walked to town to begin building his house. Had he felt so utterly alone, knowing that his only real family was still 10 years away in a place that he had never seen? I felt so alone, so utterly desolate, and I sat there looking at the letters and thinking until the sun made rainbows through the stained glass. As I did, I saw them fall on something I had missed. It was wedged far in the back, behind one of the braces, and I walked towards it like it might bite. It was another tube, this one carefully placed so that it wouldn't be jostled or broken when the time came for repairs. I opened it, and inside was a beautiful oil painting of a man sitting in the parlor downstairs. The blues looked a little different, the curtains in the style of the late 1700s, but the man sitting in a wing-back chair was someone I knew. I'd seen his picture before, but he had traded his white coat for a dark, rich suit. His hair was short, more orderly, and he'd grown a mustache. But I would have known him, even if he had a beard. It was my dad, and I knew what I would find when I carefully flipped the painting over. Marcus C. Rim, commissioned 1774 by Warren Fritz. It's framed downstairs now, as are the letters Dad left to me. I think I cherish them more than the house, as well as the knowledge that Dad never really left us. He's always been here, making sure our way was smooth from a gap of generations.
It's always strange to realize that the people who came before you had your best interest in heart, even when they didn't really know you. Coming up next, we have an odd comic book that seems to be causing quite a stir. So, let's learn a little more about issue 237.
I have acquired Khazar the Amazing, issue 237 to be exact, and it scares the crap out of me. I'm a collector of rare comics. Well, not really a collector, I guess. I never keep them for very long, you see. I prefer to sell the comics for big bucks. I buy them from Goodwill and garage sales and estate sales, anywhere I can pick them up cheap, really. I'm in it for the profit, pure and simple. But today, I may have found something that I wasn't quite prepared for. Briarcliff Estates was having an estate sale, and I knew that there would be some interesting pieces there. Mr. Briar had died at the ripe old age of 103 and was said to be a notorious pack rat. His wife and son had died years ago, both under mysterious circumstances, and Briarcliff had gained an air of mystery ever since. It was said that his house was full of things, everything from antiques and collectibles to, well, downright garbage, and I wanted to have a look. The sale was even grander than I had expected. There were halls cluttered with antique furniture, shelves full of old books, antique kitchen appliances, Persian rugs, strange art, odd articles from around the world. All the trash had been cleared away, and all the items for sale had been tagged and were on display. A large crowd had gathered, and I was more than a little interested in some of the books for my shop. The auction seemed like a total waste of time, though, right up until the last lot. The antique furniture went first, then the old cars from the garage, then the rugs and the appliances and the strange antiquities. Some of them were pretty grisly. Apparently, Mr. Breyer had been a world traveler in his youth. He had collected things from Africa, Russia, Germany, China, all of them with an eye towards the occult. I actually found myself bidding on a wand made of pure ivory, something my Harry Potter fans would have doubtlessly paid a lot of money for. But a stuffy old man in the front row shelled out about $100,000 for it, and I sat down and shut up after that. He had long white hair and an imposing beard that hung down past the waist of his immaculate gray suit. He was a jarring comparison to the toad-faced man with the all-black oiled hair on his head that sat on the far side of the hall. They seemed to know each other, know and hate each other. They had several hard looks for each other as they held their complicated bidding war, and their battles bled over into the books as well. They snapped up most of the books, old moldering things with hard-to-pronounce names, and my bids were mostly shouted over as the two dueled for the remaining tomes. Most everyone else had gone, seeing that these two meant to have the lot. So, when the last lot came up, and turned out to be a box of comics, I immediately threw out a bid of $25. I hadn't expected to see any comics here, my focus being on the antique books, but this seemed to be the only thing that these two weirdos didn't want. The bid went once, went twice, and then sold as the two glared at each other from across the room. I took my box of dusty old comics and scuttled off before either of them could realize that I had been there. I didn't realize what I had until I got home. I took them to my office and set to work. First a shower, then a change of clothes. Old comics can be finicky, and I like to be comfy when I appraise them. Then the gloves came on, a nice set of reusable rubber ones, and I put on a hairnet too. Can't be too careful with old comics. After I was set, I opened the box and had a look. I was not immediately impressed. Mr. Breyer, it appeared, had a thing for old Hanna-Barbera comics. There were some Yogi Bears, about 10 Huckleberry Hounds, some Tom and Jerry's, and a few wacky racer comics that I'd never even heard of. I set those aside. Hanna-Barbera comics never retail very high, unless you have some of the rarer pieces, that is. They were all in bags, though, and looked to be in pretty good shape, so I could at least get asking price for them. Next came some old Johnny Quest comics, and they also went to the side. Then I pulled out some old detective comics that looked to be from the early 40s run. They were bagged and looked to be in great shape. I set those on the desk by the computer. Looked like my purchase wouldn't be entirely in vain. There were some other things in there, some well-loved action comics, a few Batman issues from the late 60s, and a single issue of a comic series that I had never heard of. Sitting at the bottom of the box in a plastic sleeve that looked to be caked with dust and, maybe soda, I guess, was a copy of Khazar the Amazing, issue 237. I had never heard of Khazar the Amazing, and he appeared to be some sort of magician detective or something. I was also unfamiliar with Keystone Comics and decided to go do some research. As I brought it over to the computer, though, I felt a strong urge to drop it and just walk away. The comic felt weird, even through the gloves, and the bag was tacky in a way that soda usually wasn't. I don't know how to describe it. It was like the comic didn't want to be held. I shrugged it off at the time, but I can feel it now as it sits on the nightstand beside my computer. It doesn't want me to touch it. I looked up Khazar and found that it was part of a debut series from Keystone Comics. Khazar was in fact the only comic series they had put out, and it had a very limited run. Less than 500 issues of each comic were ever made, and they were extremely rare and not often seen at auction. Issue 237 was actually the last issue ever printed before Keystone Comics burned to the ground in 1975. The fire was supposedly investigated and ruled as an accident, despite 4 people having perished in the blaze. Chuck Landstar, the owner, and the writer of Khazar, his assistant, Mike Dre, and the illustrators who worked on the comic, Jug and Dale Treblow, had all been killed in the fire. The series had never seen the light of day again. Apparently this issue had less than the usual amount on the run. Even in its ratty condition, it was worth over $1,000. Cha-ching. $25 for $1,000 seemed like a great deal to me, and who knew what kind of bidding war I could get on this thing. I gingerly removed it from the bag and threw it away, as no customer would want it in that state. The comic itself was ragged. the spine bent, some of the page corners damaged or missing. The pages themselves looked pretty good. Old, but good, until I got to a spot near the back. Towards the end, Khazar appears to be casting some sort of spell to summon an ancient deity. He stood in the middle of the circle, laid with etchings and stone runes, and I could see quite a few bodies laying around as well. Some of them seemed intricate and embellished enough to make me think they might be the main characters he'd sacrificed. But I knew nothing of the series, so I could only speculate. There was a dark-haired woman in a slinky dress that barely contained her assets, a blonde guy with a loincloth and a skull helmet, a young boy in a red cloak, and another, less buxom redhead that seemed to have died holding hands with the kid. They were all laid out in a circle, and their deaths seemed to have been unkind. Khazar was kneeling, resplendent in his yellow and green robes, as he made his request before the towering form on the horned helm. Its eyes were coals beneath the visor, and its green armor was stained with ancient blood. It sat atop a bone-white horse, steam curling from its nostrils, as it brandished a sword at Khazar that looked big enough to cut him in half. Khazar was making his request, but the words had been smudged. The figure on the horse didn't sit right with me. Even through the page, I could feel his regard. It was like he was looking at me, judging me, weighing my worth. I closed the comic. No sense getting spooked by some old comic, I told myself with a laugh. I took some pictures next, showing the damage, and put it into a new protective bag. I uploaded the pictures to Comic Squire, the service I use to sell comics, and sat back to wait. I pulled some of the other comics I had piled up towards me and started looking them over so I could post them as well. One of the detective comics was worth about $40. That was cool. Another was worth about $30. Excellent. And I heard a ding from my computer and looked up to see that Khazar had an opening bid of $500. I typed a message to the buyer, someone named Nilrim, informing him that I was firm on $800, and went back to the other comics. Two of the detectives were so much hamster cage liner, but I saved them aside so I could put them with the bulk lot. Two more were worth about $30, and I had just started looking up the seventh when my computer dinged again. I looked up to see that the same buyer was offering $800, the price I listed it for, and I nodded and turned back to my work. The bid would sit on the site for an hour, allowing others to bid if they wanted, but I figured this guy would get it, and I would be $800 the richer. I'd barely gotten the seventh comic out of the bag when my computer dinged again. A new bid had come in for $1,000. I checked the buyer, and this time it was a new guy named Morgul. He was offering an extra $50 for overnight shipping. That made me raise an eyebrow, but I suppose he wanted to make sure it arrived undamaged. After all, this was a rare comic, and I sent him a message accepting his offer should he win. I had barely sent the message when Nilrim got back to me with $1,200. This went on for a few hours, and as the bids went up, the bidders began to message me. That was when things got bizarre. From Morgul. Dearest seller, the user Nilrim is trying to purchase your wares under false pretense. He is my rival and merely wants to own the comic so that I cannot. I implore you to award the sale to me and ship with all haste. His wording was strange, but it was nothing compared to what his rival was about to send me. From Nilrim. I must ask that you not sell this piece to Morgul. He wants it not for scholarly endowments, but for his power, and it will bring him much. I must have this item so that it can be sealed away from those who might use it for ill. Thank you. I furrowed my brow at this one. Sealed away from those that might use it for ill. It was a damn comic book. I had barely finished reading the message when I saw that Morgul had sent me another message. From Morgul. I see that you have not offered me my preference in this matter. Has Nilrim offered you something more in return for this item? I assure you I will match whatever offer he makes, no matter the cost. That took me by surprise. These guys were clearly serious collectors, or weirdos, and they could likely pay big money for it. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was stay quiet and let these two drive the price up on their own. Simple economics. They wanted it, I had it. Suddenly this ratty comic was looking like a cash cow to me. Even then, I hadn't realized the real value of the piece. I heard the computer ding as a new message from Nilrim came up. Please, I implore you not to be swayed by Morgul's boasting. If he gets the tome, it will be devastating for our world. I implore you to sell it to me. Money is no object. Name your price, and I will pay it." I sucked in air through my teeth, my small pile of potential profits forgotten. This fellow had basically written me a blank check. How much would be too much? He had said that money was no object, but there was always a limit. I looked back at the sale and realized that Nilrim had just placed a bid for $50,000. Morgul quickly countered with 60, and the two went right on sparring as I watched. I pulled up Nilrim's message again, and that was when I realized that his profile had a picture attached. I clicked on it and realized that this was the same guy from the auction today. This picture was of a grandfatherly-looking man, long white hair and beard that was downright Gandalf-esque. He was in profile in the picture, just his head and shoulders, but I was willing to bet it was the same guy. This Morgul character was likely the other man, the one who had looked like a toad and been afflicted with all that greasy black hair. They were just continuing their antics from the auction, and I was surprised they had any money left after all the crap they had bought earlier. Another message from Nilrim came in, and this one had a link at the bottom to a new site. "This must end. Morgul must not be allowed to own this spell. See what it has wrought last time it was unleashed upon the world." The link brought up an article about Briarcliff Estate. 4 bodies had been found on the grounds nearly 20 years ago. They had been arrayed in the garden, the photos looking very similar to the one in Khazar, minus the bodies, of course. Those had been replaced with tape outlines, but their placement was undeniable. Briar's wife, teenage daughter, nephew, and the brother that had been killed in what seemed like a cult activity. Briar had immediately been the first one to be suspected, but some combination of money and alibis given out of fear had cleared him. Still, his reputation in the community had been well earned. Had Briar made a deal with that horned demon? Had Briar possibly discovered something that had led him to fill his hallways with junk in an attempt to insulate himself from whatever might come for him? I saw I had a message from Morgul, a message with his final offer. The link in his message was of a Google Maps location. It was my address. His last message was much less formal and much less pleasant than the others had been. "I'm coming for what's mine. See you soon." I've been sitting in my office writing all this down for the past hour. I've locked the doors and called the police, but they don't seem to be taking this very seriously. The numbers on the bid haven't gone up in an hour, and even though Nilrim had won, I'm afraid he's never going to get what he paid for. I can see someone moving in the yard outside the window, but when I try to call the police, it just rings and rings. I don't know what to do. I can almost feel this comic watching me, even as whatever's outside keeps moving around out there. The sun will be going down soon. I wonder if they'll find my body here or by some circle in a garden somewhere.
As a seller of comics myself, you just never know what's going to be valuable to someone else, and what might be more trouble than it's worth. Our last story is about a writer and his grandson. Well, his great-grandson. A man who has lived too long and written too much, and has all of it to thank on one particular thing. So, let's learn a little more about Great-Grandpa's deal.
When my parents told me I was going to be sent to take care of my great-grandfather, I was very hesitant. My great-grandfather, Ayman Franger, celebrated his 110th birthday in December. Not that anyone had been invited to his party. Actually, there had been no party, because my great-grandfather was a shut-in. He was a famous horror writer, writing and publishing stories since the turn of the century, and he was supposed to have a small fortune saved up. As such, he lived in a Mary Shelley-style house out in the middle of nowhere, toiling away at his latest work of terror. My mother had 5 sisters, and all of them had been trying to get the highly coveted spot in Great-Grandpa's will. But so far, none of my cousins had managed it. It wasn't like I wanted any of his money, but Mom was insistent. She had been after Great-Granddad's money, just like her sisters, since her early adulthood, and now it seemed that her time had finally come around. Since all my other cousins had struck out, this seemed to be her chance. She told me to go and spend the summer, and maybe some of the fall with him, and see how things worked out. Bring some of your writings with you. Maybe that'll get you in good with the old man. And that was how I came to be on my great-grandfather's porch in mid-May, preparing to stay until nearly Halloween. The house was an old 3-story that I knew was nearly a mansion from the few times I'd been there as a kid. There were 8 rooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen, a study, and of course my great-grandfather's office on the 3rd floor. Sometimes you could see him through the large bay window as he sat up there, hard at work at the old typewriter he favored. He had once sat close to the window so that he could look out and perhaps be inspired by the forests or the lawns that surrounded his property. Now, it appeared, he preferred a spot away from such distractions. I rang the doorbell and was unsurprised to hear the lock click open electronically. Great-grandpa kept no staff. Before I'd been born, a few of his caretakers had turned up missing, and after several searches of the home and property, Great-grandpa had finally just dismissed his staff and lived alone. He had mostly relied on the kindness of his relatives, or just done without for most of my life. He was very reclusive, and I wasn't really looking forward to spending the next 6 months in his company. I'd been preparing a manuscript to send off for publication, and I figured that I would have little time for revisions if I was too busy tending to my aging grandsire and his monstrous house. Looking back on it now, I see that I really had no idea what was in store for me. The house had a musty look to it, like some old Gothic construction from one of great-grandfather's novels. I don't know if this was intentional, but it gave the place a very uncared-for look. I had to wonder what my cousin Leslie had actually done here when he stayed for 8 months last year. The floors were dusty, the drapes in the kitchen were growing a fine crop of mold from a leaky window, and the whole place just had a very dank smell about it. Given the house's age, this was no surprise. The house was well over 100 years old, and had been both my great-grandfather and my grandfather's ancestral home. Now, it was little more than a hulking relic that sat waiting for my great-grandfather to die so some construction company could turn it into a strip mall. A speaker crackled in the foyer, and the buzzing sound made me jump a foot. "Don't just stand around counting the silver. Come up to my study. I have orders for you." Even at 110, it sounded as though he hadn't lost the steel in his voice. So I climbed up the 3 flights of stairs, wondering how my great-grandfather made it up and down these stairs every day. He must come down to eat, I reflected. He hadn't had anyone to help him since Leslie had left 6 months ago. As my young, sturdy legs made the climb up the creaky old boards, I reflected that I was nearly winded as I came to the 2nd-floor landing. I would soon become quite intimate with those steps in the months to come, though. My grandfather sat in the topmost room, a room that had once been the attic. The 2nd set of stairs had been built just for him, and they were steeper than the original set by far. As I came up the stairs, I could see my grandfather's desk and the battered old wing-back chair he had owned since I was a child. The desk and the chair sat in profile, and it was like a scene from a movie. The camera would start a slow pan in and mount the stairs, and the audience would see the back of the red upholstered chair and hear the clicking of the keys. He sat hunkered there like a gargoyle, arthritic fingers tapping away at the keys of his old battered typewriter. The sound was skeletal somehow, like bones against ivory. He kept right on clocking away as I stood a respectful distance behind his chair, not wanting to get off on the wrong foot with this ancient writer that I must share quarters with for the next few months. The attic room was the size of a normal studio apartment, and appeared almost Spartan in its furnishings. There was a bed, small and neat, several sagging old bookcases that looked equally as infected with mold, a rug that stretched from the landing to his dark mahogany desk, which sat ever facing into the corner. He had once faced it towards the large picturesque window that looked over his property, but now it looked only into the corner, as though someone had put my ancient grandsire in time out. "I understand that you are to be my new caretaker." I jumped a little, the clicking leading me to believe that he would go right on ignoring me for a little while longer. His voice was creaky, raspy from lack of use. I expected to see dust puff out from behind the chair, and when he turned, I decided that my expectations hadn't been far off. To call my great-grandfather ancient would have missed the mark. The man was shrunken to the point of elvishness. He could not have been more than 4 feet tall, and his arms and legs looked shrunken and childlike. His arms were held out in front of him, hands held down at the wrists in a way that made me wonder how much it must hurt him to ride on. His legs hung an inch above the floor as he sat in that monstrous chair, and I remember thinking that he looked like a child sitting in his father's seat. The image was more grotesque than humorous, however. "You should know that I have high expectations for my helpers. I give no special treatment for family members. Your life here will be hard, but focus on the silver lining. You might just manage to acquire that oh-so-coveted spot in my will that my children and my children's children and now my children's children's children seem so incapable of garnering. Anything is possible, I suppose." And when he shrugged his shoulders, I imagined that I could hear them grind together. Listening to him talk was like watching a particularly talented bit of ventriloquism. His accent was plummy, cultured, and far too deep for the child-sized creature residing in that throne. I expected someone to poke their head out from the back of the chair any minute now, and laugh, saying how they had gotten me. When we both ended up staring at each other for the next few seconds, and no grand revelation was revealed, he went on. He told me about his meal schedule first. He ate breakfast at 5, lunch at 11, and dinner at 6. He subsided almost entirely on Campbell's soup, of which he had a large supply in the pantry. There were 7 different flavors of soup, one for each day of the week, and every month there was a number I would call to have more delivered. He told me that I could make a list of food I wanted as well, and that they would be delivering it to the house with the order. "Just keep the bill under $500 a month," he droned. "I would like to remain in funds until I die." He bathed every night at 7. While he assured me that he didn't need help bathing, he would need help getting to the bathroom, into the tub, out of the tub, and back to his room. I was to put him in the tub and then leave until summoned again. He would be fully dressed again, and when I arrived, I would help him back to his room. His schedule, other than that, seemed to be writing. He wrote sometimes for 18 or 19 hours a day, and would often write well into the night if the mood took him. He rarely slept, he told me, and I would likely find him napping in his chair if I needed something early in the morning. He slept most often between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. I was not to disturb him or make any noise between those hours whatsoever. "When you're my age, you find you just don't need to sleep as much as normal people. But I won't have the little that I do get disturbed by your needless clatter." My duties, other than feeding and bath time, were my own. I would like the house swept once a week, the windows opened once a week to air out the dust, the drapes taken down and washed once a month. I have a sneaking suspicion that feckless cousin of yours didn't accomplish any of these things, so it's likely a mess down there. I do not own a TV, nor do I have internet. There is a phone in the kitchen that you may use if you should need to, and while I do have electricity, I expect you to turn the lights off behind yourself. I seem to recall that your cousin Winifred racked up a $400 power bill while staying here, and I ejected her for it. So long as you follow my rules and keep the house, I suspect I will ignore you for your stay here, and you will have no hardships. He dismissed me after that, and thus began my time in my great-grandfather's house, a time I would come, in later years, to regret undertaking. It first began with the typing. My grandsire hadn't lied. He wrote 18 or 19 hours a day, and the keys of his typewriter were loud. You could hear him typing away from anywhere in the house, and the noise became a constant background drone. Using my hotspot on my phone, I was able to get some writing done, and my proofreading was coming along very well. It was slow, and the signal out here was poor at best, but I plucked away at it as dutiful as I could, despite the distracting sound of all that clacking. The sound almost seemed to scuttle, worming its way into your ears like phantom fingers as you sat trying to concentrate. I tried playing music, I tried using earbuds, but no matter how high the volume, the sound seemed to clatter against my senses like a badly played piano. I began to become rather sympathetic for a certain Poe character, having my own telltale heart clattering at all hours of the night. On sunny days, I would even take my laptop out onto the lawn and get some work done. Though it defied all logic, I imagined that I could hear that typewriter, even on the porch, or on the way to the mailbox down the lane, easily a half-mile from the house. I know how it sounds, but I also know what I heard, and it invaded not just my waking hours, but my resting hours as well. That's also how the dreams started. Sometimes I would dream that it was me sitting in that big old chair, typing away for hours on end as the words just came sliding up the paper. In my dream, The paper was never ending. It simply rolled on and on as it came out of the typewriter. The words rose like a tree in the forest before my very eyes. My fingers would clack endlessly on the keyboard, my young, strong digits becoming withered like great-grandfathers as I typed my life away. I was always in front of that big bay window as I worked, watching the fireflies out in the woods as they frolicked. Sometimes, though, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirrored glass and jolt awake as my great-grandfather's face looked back at me. Then there was the whispering. The whispering had likely been there from the start, but I didn't pick up on it for several weeks. Great-grandpa didn't own a vacuum, so I was stuck sweeping the floors and taking the drapes outside to beat them with a broom. Fortunately for me, carpets were not all the rage at the turn of the century, and Great-grandpa had hardwood floors throughout. I was sweeping the second floor when I heard a spidery whisper coming from the stairs at the end of the hallway. It was nearly unintelligible, the voice the thinnest of whispers, but my great-grandfather was unable to match it in his response. "I won't. You can't make me. You don't even know if he could take my place. It doesn't matter. I won't curse him with the same life I've been cursed with. Stop whispering in my ear and let me finish." Then came the loud crash of keys resumed, and Grandpa ignored whoever had been whispering to him. I thought about it as I swept, unsure what to make of it. Who had he been talking to? More importantly, who had he been talking about? I knew that he had no phone up there. If he needed something, he always called down the stairs, and the whispering had sounded like it was coming from right inside the room as opposed to a phone. I shook it off as the senile ramblings of the old and troubled man and went about my chores, wanting to get them done so I could return to my own work. That was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last time I heard those whispers. I began to hear them in more than just Grandpa's study as well. They began as something like the scrabbling of mouse feet, a skittery noise that scrabbled across my senses sometimes. The longer I listened, the more I heard, and what I heard was frightening. They whispered about far-off places and foreign hellscapes. They whispered about terrible devils and ancient evils, all of which would win in the end, despite the hero's best efforts. I heard them sometimes in my sleep, a place I could not escape them, and they often filled my dreams with terrible prophecy. The work was literally the third indication that something was amiss. While Grandpa's genre had always been horror, I was more interested in fantasy and YA. My current manuscript was a puff piece, something to get my name on the desk of an agent or a publisher so I could work on more groundbreaking fantasy. My story was good, warring vampire clans and a romance that was trying to blossom amidst the chaos, but it was nothing new. It was a safe bit of YA pseudo-fantasy, the kind that had a built-in audience and was fairly safe. The longer I worked on it inside Grandpa's house, though, the darker the story began to become. Characters began to die more often, backstories became less teen-friendly, and a shadow fell across what had been a fairly light little book up until that point. A lot of my time seemed to be spent fixing changes I had made the day before, and I was getting frustrated with the shifts in tone that seemed to be trying to take place in my story. It was as though someone was also whispering in my ear, telling me to spill blood or inject horror where none was needed. I found my mind wanting to write things that I'd never been interested in before, and the feeling made me uneasy. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my great-grandfather reading some of my editions from the other side of the table. I had fallen asleep at the keys, and when I woke up, I saw his spindly arms scrolling down as he read. It was clear he didn't like using the computer. He made a face every time he had to touch the keyboard, as if putting his fingers on it was something unpleasant. And when he saw me noticing him, he turned the computer back towards me. Then, he did something I'd never seen him do in all the years I'd known him. He smiled. "You write well, boy. It's a little fluffy for my taste, but it appears that I'm not your target audience. How long have you been writing it?" I told him I'd been writing my current work for about a year, but I'd been writing in general for most of my life. He nodded, seeming to like the taste of this new information. "Thought I was the only one, at least since your Uncle Stephen passed." Then he slid out of the chair, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the floor, and ambled back upstairs. After that, I seemed to notice him hovering around the dining room often as I made corrections and changes to my manuscript. At first I tried to ignore him, not wanting to make it awkward, but as the weeks tripped by, I asked if he'd like to come help me with my revisions. He declined at first, saying he needed to get back to work. But over time, he actually came to sit with me and helped me labor through the 500 pages of tween trash, as he often called it. Every new revision, the darker ones at least, seemed to interest him, and I found myself taking his suggestions more than I rejected them. Then, one day around Halloween, he invited me to his study. He said there was something he needed to show me. He was standing by the gigantic wingback chair when I arrived. He looked even more like an underfed child as he slid a hand over the arm, his head only slightly taller than the arm of the chair itself. "You've impressed me, son. Your writing is a little rough, but I suppose that all writing looks rough after a century of it. Many people have asked me how I've lived so long, and writing is the secret to my success. The writing, however, is only half of it. The other half is this." He stroked the chair again as he said it, a look between loathing and loving crossing his face. "Your chair?" I asked skeptically. "Not my chair. This chair was never mine. It was loaned to me on the grounds that I use it for its intended purpose." "And what purpose is that?" I asked, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickle. "Terror," he answered. I almost expected to hear thunder rumble outside as he made this exclamation. "The chair is meant to spread terror?" I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Great-grandpa didn't seem to notice. He just kept looking at the chair in that loathsomely fascinating way he had. The chair seemed to have him under its sway, and he was powerless to cleave from it. "The chair is a conduit. Its purpose is simple, to spread fear and to propagate terror. You've heard the whispers by now, I'm sure." I nodded, hearing them scurry across me even now, as I watched my grandfather stroke the old chair that suddenly seemed to be shallowly respirating before my eyes. "From the second I read the changes to your manuscript, I knew it had gotten in your head. It calls to you, just as it called to me, and now it wants to make a deal." I took a step back from the chair. "What are you talking about? A deal? What sort of deal?" "You can write forever. Write as much as you want, and your work will make you the kind of money that puts normal men to shame. All you must do is sit in this chair and let it work through you. You can do that, can't you?" I wanted to refuse him, this grinning skeleton in his slowly, but now visibly respirating chair. The longer I looked at it, the more I could see the baleful eyes, the fanning nostrils that were almost snake-like, the grinning mouth that sat in the seat. It looked at me, and as much as I wanted to deny what he was saying as the ramblings of a crazy old man, I couldn't. The chair's glamour had slipped away, and now I could see the monster that lay beneath. "Come sit," he beckoned. "Come sit and let it show you its power." I didn't want to. Sitting on that thing was the last thing I wanted to do, but I found my legs had other ideas. I had moved as if by magic, my legs that of a puppet's on strings. I expressed all my will, but I was a child resisting a hurricane. Great-grandfather moved aside as I came before his throne, and when my bottom slid into that hoary old thing, I expected the teeth to gobble me up. Instead, I was filled with something unexpected. I was filled with completion, a sense of homecoming. I was complete. I saw myself reach for the typewriter, as I had done in my dreams. The whispering beckoned me to write, compelling me to spill my talent for it, and I obliged. The words rolled from me. They weren't mine, not mine at all, but they oozed from my fingers like blood. My words became the click-clacking of the keys. My mind was a chalkboard fit only to be wiped and filled again and again. I was taken over, possessed, and the demon of inspiration capered through me. There was no endless paper now, but I saw the sheets filled and refilled again and again, made full only to be exchanged by another, and as I looked down at the ivory keys,
I felt my sanity reassert itself as I saw the stains on that virgin ivory. They were dark, old blood, but they would surely be wetted again. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking up. I was lying on the bed in my great-grandfather's study. He was sitting on the edge of it, looking even more childlike as his legs dangled. It occurred to me how infrequently I saw him away from his keyboard in all the months I'd been here, and he looked both forlorn and greatly relieved as he watched his withered feet swing. "You did quite well. The first 300 pages of a manuscript that will soon grace the New York Times bestseller list, I am certain. At least, my agent seems to think so. I never have much of a head for popular fiction." "What?" But I realized I didn't know what to ask. "It kicks like a mule, don't it, son? I remember the first time I experienced it, back in 36, or was it 26? Who can remember? I was edging towards middle age then, kids out of the house and off on their own, and your great-grandmother had just died of a sudden pneumonia. I was alone in this mausoleum, sure that I had maybe one book in me, but unsure of how to coax it out. The man I bought the chair from showed up out of nowhere, showed up as if I had summoned him, and said he had just what I was looking for. Then he showed me this ghastly hulk you see crouching over there, and I was highly skeptical. My eyebrows slid up even more when he said that it had already been paid for." He got a dreamy look on his face, as though his mind was casting back through time. "He told me that all I had to do was write, just write, and the chair would do the rest. He told me that the chair would take my writing into heights that no one had ever dared hope, and all I had to do was shake his hand. When I sat down to begin, the man tipped his hat and grinned like an imp. I never looked back. At first, it was thrilling, churning out stories, books, whole series over the course of years. I was detailing my legacy at a breakneck speed. I was like a dragon, looking up to see decades pass by as I sat before my window." His dreamy look became melancholy then, his toes flapping bonelessly as his legs rose and fell like lunatic jackstraws. "This is my legacy, boy. This is the inheritance that all my children, and all my grandchildren, and all my great-grandchildren have struggled for. The money, the house, the land, none of it matters. My inheritance is that chair and that typewriter and a legacy of stunning horror. It is a mantle, and if you chose not to take it up, I would understand. But, and I know from experience, if you don't take it up, you'll drive yourself crazy thinking about what could have been. You'll wonder if the success you have couldn't have been greater, if the joy you felt could not have been more, and if your years upon the earth could not have been better spent." He looked at me then with such naked hope that I realized what it would mean if I took this burden from him. He would die, but it seemed he was ready to die. His legacy would be mine. The paper would say that the talent ran in the family, and it would continue to run until I passed it on or fell to dust. In the end, I can't even say that I did what I did to save my great-grandfather from his continued suffering. In the end, I did it because he was right. If I didn't do it, I would always wonder what if. He extended his hand to me. "The papers are signed and sitting on my desk. The house, the land, it's all yours. Everything. And everything that comes with it," he emphasized. I'm proud to say that my hand didn't shake as I took his. On the third pump of his arm, my great-grandfather turned to dust, and I was left to sit and watch him scatter across the place he loved so much. Then I took my place in the mouth of that great beast and began to write. I would continue to do so for a very long time. It's been so long since I watched my grandsire dissolve before my eyes. In that time, I've been the most prolific horror writer of my age. I've built up money like some old dragon, sitting on my wealth as I hunker on my hill. Sometimes my relatives come to see me, but most times they don't. My own mother refused to talk to me after great-grandfather left everything to me in his will, but I hardly noticed.
She died a few years ago, or was it a few decades? I didn't attend the funeral. Being away from my work for too long makes the whispers less quiet. I travel some, as my grandfather must have done in the beginning, but I never stay away for long. The stories must be told, the conduit must be maintained, and I must remain the keeper of this black lighthouse. It takes a toll, though, to be certain. I understand why my great-grandfather slept so little. If I cannot continue to expel this darkness, it pools inside me, and the vivid nightmares often bring me screaming back to reality. The bags under my eyes have become luggage, and yesterday I glanced up into the window and thought I'd seen a ghost. The old man that looked out from it was withered and sunken, and I thought that great-grandpa's ghost had returned to torment me. I see now why great-grandfather moved into the corner after a time. I'm not entirely alone, though. My cousins have gone on to have children of their own, and sometimes they send them to me, as I was once sent. One of them, a girl named Katie, is on her way now. I've heard that Katie is a rather prolific poet, and said to be quite talented. We shall see what the chair makes of her. Who knows? Perhaps I might be allowed to stop too before long, and bask in the comfortable blackness that awaits me as well. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you enjoyed tonight's story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Maybe turn on notifications so you don't miss any other stories. We're getting close to 1,000 subs, and I know the algorithm likes it when you've got over 1,000 subs. Regardless of whether we have 1 sub or 100,000, I'll be here 3 times a week to read the stories you love just for you. Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors before we sign off. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do it without you. And of course, a big thank you to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghostwriter tier contributor. Hope you're doing well, Glenn. Hope those books are treating you all right. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For the price of a arguably overpriced coffee drink, you too can support the show and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I make. If you'd like a copy of my books, they're up on Amazon. I have 4, with a 5th coming out in July. There's a link in the description, so come on down and purchase one of my books. I always recommend Dark Vortex because that's what we're reading on our Wednesday story now, so you can read along with us. It'll be like a little book club. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back again very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.